We can't just be an object. In other words, this could be something that machines wouldn't be bothered by. We don't know yet. We haven't reached that age, but we have to proceed through values with our choices. In other words, in order to find our own purpose, humans need to create their own values. What do I value?
Hello everyone from Istanbul School. Dear viewers, this week we will talk about the value of values. Our guest is Dr. Yasin Ramazan. Welcome.
We are welcome.
How are you, Hoja?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Thank you very much, Professor. We chose a title like the value of values. What is value? Let's start with that first if you want. How do you define it?
Value, of course, can be given many meanings if we approach it from different disciplines. The value we will talk about is actually a metaphysical value. In other words, if we give a general definition, it means that something is a part of a whole. This is value. If we try to understand it in the opposite way, for something to be a value means that it is not just its function. In other words, what is its function? It means that it is useful for the realization of something else. This is not all. We have values and something has value. These are things that show which whole it is a part of and actually show its metaphysical place. And in this sense, a human being is a being that produces value and lives with value. He lives not only with functions, but also with the function of anything. We perceive this in a metaphysical sense. We live with it, but we can also reflect this in many areas. In other words, almost all of the things we call economic value, historical value, social value, or emotional value today are related to the value we give to it. They are not just about their functions. Let's give an example. Let's say you are wearing a shoe. What is the value of the shoe? You are questioning this. If you talk about the financial value of the shoes you buy, we can reach something by talking about their production, sales, and quality. This is actually about their functions. In other words, they both have a social function, and when you wear them, they may have a value such as keeping you warm, being comfortable, being ergonomic. But if someone you love bought those shoes for you, the shoe will have extra value. This extra value is actually the value we are talking about. It is something that cannot be reduced to function.
It seems to be a bit of a spiritual thing.
Yes, it is metaphysical. In other words, it is not just about it performing a certain function. For example, let's say there is shoe A, you bought it and you use it. Your spouse bought shoe B, your lover bought it and he bought it to show his love for you. The difference between these two is a difference in value. Even if they are exactly the same, the value of one is different from the other. This is where value comes into play, and as you said, it is not a physical thing, it is a spiritual thing, but this seems a little foreign to us. In other words, if we experience everything physically, where does this value come from? I actually argue the opposite. The physical existence has no meaning beyond its function. We can put everything aside when its functions are over, but we do not live with these. We are always interested in something beyond this.
So as human beings, we already need values because we live in a world where everything is material. In this world, when we assume that everything works in a mechanical way, where everything robotically fulfills its own function, when we look at what is left, we need to be able to see values at this point.
Yes, I mean, for example, let's say that what we actually see in robotization or standardization is the reduction of everything to its function. So let's say there is a door handle. This door handle has a function to open and close the door, to keep it closed when it is closed, and so on and so forth, to create a mechanism with its locks. It has such a function, of course, but if you start to process that door handle, if you start to create an art, a value starts to be produced there at the same time. Now let's say you go to a palace or visit a cafe in a more historical apartment building. Pay attention to the door handles there. It performs the same function. Opening and closing the door, it performs such a function, but there is an extra value in that door handle. So there is a meaning, and art is reflected. I want to emphasize that the value here is a metaphysical value.
You say this in terms of things, but can we measure the value of people in the same way? I mean, a person also has a purpose, a goal, but can we say that they have a value beyond that?
Actually, the situation is completely different with human beings, because human beings are capable of creating their own value. We don't know if there is any other being in such a way, but it is not possible to talk about a basic function of human beings. I mean, so-and-so may have a task, but we have the ability to transform this task into a value. How? Basically, human beings have a mind that cannot be reduced to any function, because we can realize what we call creation. We can be creative, so we are not like a doorknob. We don't have the function of opening and closing the door. Instead, we are beings that act with purpose. So our difference from natural beings and what we call objects is that as a subject, we can also have a certain function in nature. For example, as a living being, for example, our body that goes into the ground when we die may have a function. But we are not content with this. We produce value. We produce value ourselves. For example, what we call art, what we call philosophy, what we call science, what we call knowing, or what we call society are all made up of values. And these extra values emerge from the ability of human beings to create a purpose for themselves. For example, we are now organizing a conversation as the Istanbul School. We have a purpose here, don't we? You know, when people put their heads together and say what we can do together, what we can do it for, what we want to achieve with it, as soon as you say this, you take your life out of being a function and you get a purpose for yourself. So if we say this in a more digital language, you are actually constantly reprogramming. Of course, this is an analogy. We don't program ourselves, but this ability of ours gives us the chance to produce value.
So can we say that values give people purpose at this point?
Goals also give value, so I don't want this to be perceived as causality all of a sudden, but we need to know this. We achieve certain goals to produce value, and because we have values, we sometimes achieve goals. For example, let's say you don't want children to go hungry. You establish an association for this. Your goal is to prevent children from going hungry, but at the same time, that's your value. Therefore, the fact that this value of yours, that is an organization that you established so that children don't go hungry in the world, is a goal, is what makes that value valuable. Therefore, as humans, we always give value, add value, produce value. We use our creativity in this direction.
So how can a person find their own purpose? Is there a way to do this?
This is a very important question. As humans, we must first know that we are not objects. In other words, yes, we are sometimes objectified in society. In other words, let's say you may be performing a function like an object. The things you do at work, the things you do at school, or the things you do in society may be performing certain functions. Let's say you have become a parent. Some of your responsibilities towards your child may become a function for the continuation of society. And you can continue that function. This function cannot continue for a long time because we cannot accept being an object. We cannot be just an object. In other words, this may be something that machines will not be very bothered by. We do not know yet. We have not reached that age, but we have to proceed through values with our preferences. In other words, people need to create their own values in order to find their own purpose. What do I value? What do I care about? We are in an age where this is difficult because the first is objectification, that is, the function of functionalization, reducing to a function, has a very serious pressure on people. Materialism, that is. In one sense, it actually has a positivist side, but we are actually facing nihilism, not positivism. When it comes to these values, but in order for a person to determine their own purpose, to find their own purpose, to be able to give their life a path specific to this purpose, they need to question their values and find them. And in order to find them, they need to realize that they are a value first. What does this mean? I do not get my value from anything else. We are automatically valuable. In other words, this is an ontological thing. For example, a person is born, grows up, thinks about whether they have a function, etc. These are things specific to objects. For example, if there is a screw, let's say you are making a table. You used a lot of things while making the table, but there is only one screw there. There is no place to put that screw. This screw is useless. It is completely useless. You can put it aside. The table is complete and the screw is unnecessary. You can throw it away or give it away. Anyway, it did not have a function with that screw, but people are not like that. The value of a person comes from themselves. Therefore, we need to find out that we do not lose this ontological value.
There can be situations where a person feels very worthless and dysfunctional from time to time. In other words, when they cannot adapt to anywhere in society, when they cannot find a place in their family or circle of friends, they may start to think, do I not have a place to be anywhere? Or do I have no value? I am saying this especially for young people during their adolescence. There can be times when they feel very worthless when they cannot find a place for themselves in the world. Here you are talking about a sentence like, even though I am nowhere, even though I do not belong anywhere, I am still valuable on my own as myself. To put this a little more clearly, are you saying that a person can find this value for themselves just because they exist?
Yes, just existing as a human being is valuable. There may be many ideologies against this, but before that, there is a function that the consumer society wants to give you in terms of participating in production. And you start to live and grow up with a feeling that your value comes from this function. That's why, for example, when you feel worthless, you often think that you have no effect on the environment, that you have no benefit to the environment. Being useful to the environment, having an effect is one thing. Your ontological value, your metaphysical value is another. You are valuable in any case, regardless of what you do. We have to build value on this value, otherwise we do not get our value from what we do, because values mean being a part of a whole. First of all, they are born and grow as part of the value of being human. Therefore, the idea of worthlessness or the feeling of worthlessness works as a kind of control mechanism of society. In other words, in order to gain value, you have to do these things, you have to prove yourself, you have to do these things, you have to do these things. First of all, a person should see himself as a value independent of these, because it is. If you exist ontologically, if you can produce value, that is because you have a mind, you are a value. Period. Then you start producing value based on this. What can I do? You can determine your own purpose. You can try to find your own purpose. And this can be in the form of taking purpose from others. It can also be taking a purpose for yourself within the adventure of life. In any case, a person does not become worthless just because they do not fulfill their functions according to someone else.
At the same time, as something more fundamental, I see here that in order to understand one's own value, in order to achieve one's purpose, one needs to know oneself first and foremost. In other words, he needs to gain clarity in his own thoughts. For example, he should not pretend. At the same time, there is a picture emerging, isn't it, that he should really be doing something, really loving something, not pretending to love something, pretending to do something.
Of course, for example, valuing yourself means, first of all, apart from the 8 billion people in this business, I also exist. So, what is meant by me? What kind of value am I? In order to find out, one has to go back to oneself, get to know oneself, listen to one's own wants and needs, and do this without being condescending. How you are constituted according to society, according to people, according to history, according to language, according to philosophy, is a separate question. But the fact that you exist as a separate subject is enough for you to be of value. It has to give you this. What do I sincerely want to do? So when you behave as if you are doing this, as if you are owning that, the value you place on yourself actually diminishes more and more. You need to own this value. What do I sincerely see myself as, and what am I trying to do with it? What kind of life will I live with it? What will I give? What will I give to humanity? What will I get from people? In this sense, sincerity to oneself is important in order to increase one's own value. You may lose other people's respect and love as a result of this. You may lose money. You may lose a lot of things but this is where we are most mistaken. Values are reduced to a gain. That is, when you think that you get your value from a gain, the value is actually objectified. In other words, it is reduced to its function. If you are now constantly striving to win, constantly winning, being successful at work, constantly defeating things, getting ahead of them, or not being on the losing side in a struggle.
Don't act on an ambition.
When you transform the function, you have transformed your whole purpose. That function ends at some point. You lose your money, you lose your environment, you can lose everything. In order to understand, in order to feel that you will still have value when you lose all of these, you need to be able to say this from the very beginning. What gives me my value, what makes me valuable is not what I pretend to be. It is actually the value I give to myself, the purpose I give to myself.
When we look at it from the other point of view, it seems that pretending, not being like oneself, acting out of oneself can turn into a situation where one loses respect for oneself, even if one gains the respect of others.
Yes, laughs. This respect is the key word here. If people value themselves, they treat themselves with respect. For example, how you treat someone else when you value them. Let's say, how you treat them with tolerance towards their mistakes or some of their shortcomings. You need to treat yourself in the same way. In other words, even though that feeling of worthlessness is constantly coming to you, such as you didn't do this, you didn't do that, you were late, you are incompetent in this, you failed in that, you couldn't say, but I exist despite everything, and this means that I am valuable. Accepting oneself, learning from past mistakes and focusing on the future is an important step towards realizing one's worth. Therefore, it is necessary to be able to put aside what others think.
In fact, at some point, it is as if those voices coming from outside are like, you are not like others, you are inadequate, you cannot succeed. But when we see the behaviors that we can tolerate, when we see them in someone else, we can sometimes disrespectfully and sometimes cruelly against ourselves, we can show them. Maybe we will be a little more aware at this point, teacher.
Yes, so we shouldn't think of it in a narcissistic sense of seeing ourselves as superior to everything and everyone or ignoring our own mistakes. We need to do this. So let's say a child makes some mistakes and you are the mother, father, brother, sister of that child and you love that child in some way. You cannot throw him aside or erase him because he made a mistake. If you love him, you can guide him. If you respect him, as long as you at least feel that he exists, that he has value, you start to think about how he can give up his mistake. In the same way, we have to go back to ourselves. Of course, I'm not saying anything like the child in us, that's beyond me, but we need to feel that we are valuable in the sense that we exist, just like we value a child. Then we will see that we also value other things. For example, making art is like that. Even doing sports is like that. We often hear people saying that they start sports, but after a few days they quit, or that they will start sports on Monday, next week, at the beginning of the month, and so on. It's a huge burden because you're thinking about it as if it is. It's like starting sports for other people, doing something else. On the contrary, you need to think like this. For example, what does sport add to my value? What will doing sports add to me? What kind of value will I get here? If we think about this, we don't need any other motivation. If you really want things that will add value to your value, you don't need any other motivation. But if you say, I should do sports so that I can become muscular like this, lose weight like this, so that people will accept me, you need other motivations for that. And those motivations will probably be things that turn you into functions. In the end, maybe your muscles will grow bigger, you will lose weight, but I'm not sure if this will prevent you from feeling worthless.
We see that some values sometimes become instrumental, sir. How do you evaluate this?
This is like this. If you are used to living with functions, if you are used to seeing yourself as a function, we see that what we call values, for example, what we call compassion, what we call solidarity, are gradually becoming instrumentalized, and everything is becoming instrumentalized. You start to instrumentalize, you start to use, you start to abuse all values in order to gain power, in order to have a say in society, in order to achieve an economic goal, in order to achieve a political goal. Because you say that you are attached to something other than myself, something very valuable, very important. All your value depends on something outside yourself. Therefore, you do not hesitate to use and abuse everything for that thing. In this sense, you instrumentalize and objectify everything, including yourself, and this is the basis of what we call nihilism. For example, what can we put in front of value? It's not positivism or materialism, it's actually nihilism. It is the point that nothing has meaning, nothing has value. On the contrary, even objects have value in terms of their own existence. Human beings have much more value as a subject. In order not to miss this value, instead of instrumentalizing values, we should seek help from art, philosophy, and science, which can give even tools of value. In this way, we can continue to live by preserving the intrinsic value of both human beings and all beings.
Thank you very much, teacher. You really gave very valuable information. It was a valuable distinction. In other words, instead of instrumentalizing values, you talked about making tools and objects valuable when necessary and acting by valuing them and seeing people as the most valuable of all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dear viewers, we talked about the value of values today. See you in the next episode. Goodbye.